to the Merage family for collaborating with the Center to promote a deeper understanding of the impact of immigration and immigrants on our society. And after I'm finished speaking, Mr. Merage would like to just make a few comments. We'd like to thank Marshall Kaplan, Executive Director of the Merage Foundation for the American Dream, for his guidance and leadership in this partnership. And finally, we would like to recognize the Merage American Dream Fellows who are here in the audience today. This week in Washington, we're celebrating the achievements and future contributions of this impressive group of top immigrant graduating university students who have been awarded fellowships from the Merage Foundation to pursue their American dreams. I'd like to welcome now our very distinguished panel. It's an honor to host Henry Cisneros here at the Center. He is author of the recent publication, Latinos and the Nation's Future. The book is over there. He's executive director of CityView, which works with the nation's leading home builders to create affordable housing for working families. His passion and commitment to revitalizing cities and improving living conditions for America's urban residents is well known to all of us. Mr. Cisneros was the first Hispanic American elected mayor of a major U.S. city, San Antonio. And during his 4-year term as mayor, the revitalization of San Antonio became a national model for success. He served as Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development in the Clinton administration, where he transformed the nation's public housing and created policies that achieved the country's highest ever home ownership rates. His education and numerous accomplishments are further detailed in the biographies that we've distributed, and they're available outside. We're very pleased to welcome again Tamar Jacoby to the Center. She's president and CEO of ImmigrationWorks USA, a national federation working to advance better immigration law. We are grateful for her contribution to projects and her participation in previous seminars here at the Wilson Center. A nationally known journalist and author, she's a leading advocate for immigration reform. Her numerous articles and opinion pieces have appeared in all the major media outlets. She's the author and editor of books about immigrant integration and contributed a chapter on immigration policy reform in the U.S. to the volume that we're discussing today. She was a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, before that senior writer and justice editor for Newsweek. She was also deputy editor of the New York Times op-ed page. And finally, I'd like to introduce Antonio Maciel. He's president of Our Pledge, a new initiative to promote and assist with immigrant integration. Most recently, Mr. Maciel completed a 12-year tenure at the Open Society Institute, where he worked in several capacities, including director of the U.S. Justice Fund, overseeing all of the foundation's grant-making and programmatic activities related to criminal and civil justice in the U.S. He has extensive experience in the philanthropic and immigrants' rights fields. Prior to joining OSI, Mr. Maciel worked as a program officer at the Joyce Mertz Gilmore Foundation and also as a staff attorney at the ACLU Immigrants' Rights Project. He sits on a number of boards and has served on advisory committees concerned with immigration policy and grant making. We're looking forward to a fruitful discussion today about strategies to promote the success of immigrant communities and policies that lay the groundwork for a more cohesive and integrated society. I will ask that each panelist speak approximately 20 minutes, and that will leave ample time for questions and discussion with the audience. And now I would like to introduce Mr. Paul Merage.
Thank you. I will be very brief. First of all, I want to thank the Woodrow Wilson Center for being great partners to our foundation, and they have been there for us for the past several years for everything that we've done in Washington, and you couldn't ask for better partners. So thank you very much for that. And in addition, I want to thank our panelists, two of whom, Henry and Tamar, have been actually on our board, and we are delighted to have them here. And we're going to make new friends as well today. America is changing, and it's changing very rapidly, and I think the demographics of change also are upon us. These are going to change our lives in some very, very important ways that probably are unexpected by most of us. So I think Henry's the book that he has edited Latinos and the Nation's Future. And I hope all of you will have a chance to read it. Is a very important document because it's very timely in terms of the fact that this is a dialogue that needs to be addressed, and this is an issue that is not going to go away. It is not only a Latino issue, but it's an issue that is going to deal with how demographic changes are going to be dealt with within our country. And it's going to either mean success or failure for our society for the next 20 to 30 years. So I'm delighted to be here, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. Let me begin by thanking in a profound way Paul Merage and his family for the creation of the Merage Foundation. I've had the privilege of being on the board for the last 4 years or so, the founding board, and I must say I have great admiration and respect for what Paul has done here. First of all, there are many people with resources and good fortune and wealth in our world who never make the kind of contribution that Paul already has just by devoting resources to such a subject. But beyond that, he has spent his personal time. I have never attended a board meeting that he wasn't there, or a session of the Merage Foundation like this, where he is physically present to learn, to contribute, to steer the organization and guide it further. So this is a really special contribution that merits all of our appreciation and recognition. Paul, thank you very much. And of course, he's supported by his family, and part of that extended family is his collaborator, Marshall Kaplan, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for 30 years plus, from the days that he worked at the Department of Housing and Urban Development and pioneered important programs in the Great Society days. He's been working in urban affairs, in academia, and now making what may be his greatest contribution to the country's future by his work at the Merage Foundation. It's a special treat also to be with Tamar. I have a wonderful, intense friendship with Tamar as a result of our work together in this field. We are co-founders of this entity that now Antonio Maciel is going to lead, called Our Pledge. I'll tell you a little bit more about it, and Antonio will as well, focusing on the integration of immigrants beyond the legal technicalities of legalization and citizenship, is the issue of really integrating into American society by learning the language, by focusing on financial literacy and financial integration, children and schools, the whole range of things that put people on a life plan to really function within American society. This subject of immigration is truly one of the most important in our country, in our times. It has always been an important part of the American story, but now it may be decisive in terms of the American trajectory for the future. The strength of our country vis-a-vis other nations, our national security concerns, our economic prosperity, all of them may well turn on how well we integrate the immigrants among us. One needs only to look at the prospects for our northern industrial nation allies, America's allies for the last 50 years, Japan, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, the Scandinavian countries, to see that the lack of growth in those countries from indigenous populations matched to no immigrant traditions will pose very serious questions. Frankly, I think we've not done enough analysis in the United States to compare the destiny of those places, the difficulties they will confront, and the alternative, which is intelligent immigration strategies for the northern countries. They will face issues in funding their Social Security systems. They will face difficulties in anything that relates to manpower, human resources, for example, their armed services. Many of them will be forced to import workers on short order to meet their workforce needs, and yet, because they have no traditions of immigration, will have deep challenges of social alienation within their societies because they will be importing workers from dramatically different societies, bringing different cultural, religious, and other mores. We see already some of the implications in France, in England, in Germany, Turkish workers imported into Germany, severe questions. Now, the United States will have its share of problems, but the problem of growth of population will not be one of them because our immigrant populations are making a massive contribution to the American future. Today we are a nation of just over 300 million people. We passed that mark in October of 2006. We are about 300 million people. The census tells us in its mid-range estimates, not its most aggressive, not its most conservative, but its mid-range estimates that we will be at about 430 million people in 2050. That is essentially 40 years from now. Now, if that sounds like off in some distant future, it's the same distance we have come since 1970. That was 40 years ago. Many of us were already, many in this room were already in their prime of their careers or young careers in any event. In 1970, that's the time frame in which this growth occurs. 130 million additional Americans. Now, let's talk a little bit about the composition of that 130 million, the delta, the new population that will be in America in that era, in that period. 18 million of those 130 million Americans will be traditional Anglo-Americans, 18 of the 130. 25 million will be, of the additional number, will be African Americans. 25 million more African Americans. 27 million more will be of Asian heritage, of the new growth, and 63 million of the 130, very near the 50%, or half of the population, will be Latinos. Now, at the end of the period, America will still be a nation that is about 51-49, or right at 50-50, traditional white populations versus minority populations. But from what I've just described, you can tell that as the nation changes, the new 130 million people who go through the phases of life in this period that I'm describing between now and 2050, fully half of that will be Latino, and the vast majority of it will be African American, Latino, and Asian American. Latinos alone will exceed 100 million Americans in that time and represent, as I say, about one half of the population that growth that occurs in that period. I'm going to focus my remarks today because the title of our session relates to the Latino population. It is the subject of the book that Tamar and I just collaborated in, and because it is such a large portion of the immigrant population on the Latino reality. Now, why will Latinos grow by this number? Well, in part it is due to the rates of growth of indigenous populations, built on the reality of past immigrations. One could close the border today, and these numbers would not be appreciably different because they're already built into the American demographic. They are past immigration. They are projected foreign-born Hispanic births, which is the highest segment of the American population in terms of births in any given year. And a very interesting phenomenon during this period will be the growth of the second generation of Hispanic immigrants and their own family formations. The Pew Foundation tells us that net number, which is 11 million people today, second generation Hispanics, will be 30 million in 2030. So it triples over the course of the next 20 years or so. Now, what are the implications of all of this for the United States? To have that dimension of change in the growth that's occurring in the United States. Well, things will change in our country. We're going to see this in our public schools. We'll see it in the progression to college. The makeup of community colleges and universities will be decidedly different in the time period that we're describing. We'll see it in markets as consumer products relate to the reality of these markets, rebranding of products. We'll see it in big ticket purchases, for example, financial institutions, automotive, and homes. In many industries view the growth of Latinos, and immigrants as the principal basis by which they will grow. Absent this population, they would not grow. In fact, there are entire regions of the United States that, absent immigrants, would be basically stagnant. It is the immigrant populations that create growth, which in turn create markets. And in a free enterprise system, the growth of markets is absolutely key to economic prosperity. Immigrants, Latino immigrants in particular, right at the heart of these economic strategies. We will see these changes in community leadership at the level of school districts and city council members and mayors. We'll see it in national leadership as we see new names in foundations, in the church organizations of our country, and in institutions like the Supreme Court, where the country's having a difficult time learning to pronounce Sotomayor. In fact, one of the critiques I saw the last week that proves that she's not integrated is that she pronounces her name Sotomayor instead of the more American pronunciation of something like Sotomayor or something else. I don't know. The country will have to learn some of these more complex pronunciations going forward. We'll see the implications in science and technology, in healthcare, both in the patient load of hospitals and medical systems, as well as in the staffing. But for immigrant and minority staffing of, for example, nursing homes, older populations will have a very difficult time getting the care that they require. We'll see these numbers and change in any institution that requires young manpower. For example, the staffing of our military. We'll see it in public sector financial systems, for example, Social Security and health insurance systems that are supported by the present generation of workers to support those who have retired or those who need health care. All of that will be funded by the workforce of the future, which is this minority and immigrant workforce that we're describing. So the conclusion that we reach in this book, and if you wanted to take this book and reduce it to one sentence, I pray that you don't, because then there's no reason to purchase it. But the one line that is the point of the book is the following. This is no longer about Latinos or immigrants alone. This is about the future of the country itself. We're at a critical point in American history where the issue is not just the numbers, but the relative state of life of these comparative populations. That is to say, the traditional American population is aging. It is not replacing in birth rate. When we have 130 million new Americans coming between now and 2050, and only 18 million of the new are traditional Anglo populations, it tells you something about different dynamics in the population. And what it means is that if this country doesn't integrate in every respect, educationally, skills, workforce capacities, financial capabilities, accession to the middle class, growth into meaningful market capacities, leadership development, if it doesn't integrate these populations in every way, then we will confront the duality of a nation that is bifurcated into people who are poor and alienated and angry, or on the other hand, a nation that integrates these populations into their creative capacities. We know that this population is going to be large. Large. When I say large, I'm talking about immigrants, Latinos, minorities generally for the moment. We know it's going to be large, but is it going to be large and undereducated, underproductive, undercompensated, and alienated? A real drag, if you will, on the American future? Or is it going to be a population that is large, but incorporates the raw energies of youthful talent, of creative capabilities, of a young and skilled workforce integrated into the mainstream of the American future? That, it seems to me, is the challenge before our country. And it's why I make the argument that this is now risen to the level of one of the more dramatic, one of the clear choices before the nation. That is to say, along with the other things that we know are going to be mega impacts, like continuing globalization, or like the healthcare revolution and biosciences, which some say will be as important in the 21st century as computers and telecommunications were in the 20th century as breakthroughs. As mega impactful as that will be this question of how we integrate immigrants, particularly Latino immigrants because of the numbers, into the American mainstream in order for the country itself to be strong, for the country itself to be competitive. Now let me just very quickly share with you some attitudes that characterize this situation. They're myths, myths among those who are fearful of what this implies, myths among many advocates for immigrants as well. There are sort of ideals and myths there. And then maybe a little bit of a dose of reality. Sort of think in terms of sort of three columns. For example, there's a myth that immigrants are not integrating. It breeds fears. There's a fear that immigrants are not integrating. There's the Pollyannish view, which is too facile, that things are proceeding just fine. We can live with the separations that exist, and we have this assimilation versus acculturation debate. I think the reality is that immigrants have a hard road in a complex society, maybe harder than immigrants have confronted before because of the segmentation of America economically and so forth. So there are the fears, there is the Pollyanna-ish answer, and then there is kind of the reality. There are fears that immigrants are not learning English. The Pollyanna-ish response is, well, it'll happen in due course in the second or third generation, and that's good enough. The reality is people need to learn English, need to learn it now. There's an absence of English classes sufficient to provide training at the community level. These are things we need to do in order to facilitate the integration. There's a fear that all immigrants are newcomers, illegal, and a burden in their communities. And we see responses like Hazleton, Pennsylvania, or Farmers Branch, where local governments are taking the lead in making it illegal for people to rent or to work in their communities. There's the Pollyannish response that says, no, these minorities have long roots in the United States and they will be duly recognized for hundreds of years of history. In fact, the reality is there are about 12 million undocumented people in the United States functioning as a part of our society today, and we have to address the reality of 12 million undocumented that are part of the immigrant story. There are those who would say that, who fear that immigrants are separatist, insular, not engaged in civic life, and others would say in the Pollyanna response, no, this is part of the American dream. They are patriotic Americans and cite examples of service in the military in some cases and so forth. The truth of the matter is that people struggle in communities, and we need to create the institutions that make it possible for immigrants to feel more welcome in our society and more able to function in our society. So we have work to do. Again, the fear is that immigrants are unduly engaged in criminal activity, undocumented persons involved in drugs or gangs. Those who would respond in a too facile a way would say, no, that's just racial profiling. In fact, we know that the more people are marginalized, the more they struggle in communities, and we lose many young males, for example, to gang activity. So there are realities that have to be dealt with and price to pay for the isolation of people. There are those who fear that Latinos in particular are unambitious, culturally not wired to integrate into American society. The Pollyanna response would be, no, this is a very entrepreneurial population, just give them a chance and they work. There's a lot of truth to that. But it is also true that American society must keep open the doors of opportunity if we are going to integrate this population. It cannot integrate in a society where we're shutting things down, be it public schools because we want to shift to other strategies, or the openness of the willingness of our local governments to create opportunity and contracting procedures and entrepreneurial strategies and so forth. So on the one hand, we have to counter the fear and set the record straight. On the other hand, we cannot be Pollyanna-ish and overly facile about this and say it's going to take care of itself, because the truth of the matter is we're not on track toward integrating these populations. We have to recognize that this is a work in progress, that we need massive cooperation on the part of the society, that we're at a point like the nation was in 1900 or so, when there was a massive immigrant population. But in those days, there was a greater consensus, it seems to me, on the integration of immigrants. Everybody recognized they were needed to build the country, whether it was to open the West or build the railroads or build the industrial society or save our great cities, but there were welcoming institutions. The church wanted parishioners, and therefore there's a church on virtually every block in Chicago with a different ethnic heritage, you know. The political clubs wanted voters, so they brought them turkeys at Thanksgiving and coal in the wintertime to get their votes. The unions wanted workers and unionized and welcomed them. Today, immigrants come, and they're pretty much on their own. The settlement houses of the kind that Jane Addams created, Hull House in Chicago, don't exist on a broad scale, not on a systematic way. If this is critical to the future of our country, then we must embark on a national strategy of immigrant integration. There are few countries in the world, Australia being one, that actually have national policy on immigrant integration. The United States is lacking in this respect, and it is a big challenge for the years ahead. Let me just close by saying that I think if we want to use an athletic metaphor, we can think in terms of offense, or rather defense and offense. We need both. If you regard defense as doing the bare minimum, if you will, to stay abreast, to sustain, to reach normality, then we must improve school performance among immigrants. We've got to deal with health morbidities and problems unique to immigrant populations. We deal with the issue of crime and environmental issues, language skills, deal with some of these mythologies, these stereotypes, these attacks that I've described, and as a defensive act to stabilize immigration reform, to take the 12 million undocumented and create some sort of legal structure where people can function outside the shadows. So that's defense. If we want to play offense and begin to really advance the country's future, then we have to think not just about the bare essence of public education, but K through 16 college preparation. We have to think in terms of job skills that move people from poverty to the middle class. We have to have an income strategy that allows people to begin to amass wealth through savings and home ownership strategies. Focus on leadership development, on community building and community organizing. Heavy emphasis on families and children. Strategies related to prenatal care, early childhood education. There's a group meeting here today in Washington, the Latino Alliance for Families and Children, just forming from groups all around the country to focus on the reality of how much of this population is young and how we have to start very early with this population. So that gives you a sense, if you will, of what I think is one of the absolutely critical questions before our country. Let me close my remarks by just recalling an articulation of the challenge that I heard recently presented by Roberto Sudo. Many of you know him from his previous work at Pew. He's now at the University of Southern California and will be taking a leading role out there in framing immigrant issues. He says that there is an implicit bargain that we've made as a country with immigrants. We say to the newcomer, you leave home to come here, you pay your money, you take your chances. Keep your nose clean, and good luck. There's minimal guarantees of any safety net or civil rights protections. No immigration policies as exist in a few countries around the world. But the other end of the bargain is your kid can grow up to be president. An explicit promise of a quality public education and equal opportunity, and it works. Because the American dream, played forward, is the most powerful motivator ever conceived. It is a powerful motivator. Those of you who are the fellows in this room are an example of the personal motivations that are set in motion when opportunity is presented. If we break that bargain as a country, who loses? Well, some would say the immigrants lose. In fact, the truth is America loses. Immigrants are our future. Thank you very much.
It's a hard act to follow. Let me also begin by thanking everyone. Thank you to the Mirages. Thank you to Marshall Kaplan. Thank you to Henry. It's nice to be here among so many old friends. Nevertheless, the moral of the story of my appearance is be careful what you let Henry talk you into. If you don't remember anything else from what I say. And the reason is that he persuaded me to write the political chapter of that book, wherever it is that we've been pointing to, the political chapter of Latinos in Our Nation's Future for a book that went to press on October 2008. So if you can imagine somebody waking up in November, whatever day it was, 2008, and feeling, oh my gosh, what did I say in that chapter? The world has turned over many times in Latinos' participation in America's future. So I'm not saying don't buy the book, but maybe don't read my chapter. I'm actually joking, but. The point is that the and I'm going to talk. I'm going to talk about this. Latinos, for a long time, people have said that Latinos in American politics, Latinos were the sleeping giant of American politics. And the reason that people thought that is they looked at it and they said, look at these demographics, look at these numbers, look at the percentage of the population, look at the percentage in the second generation. But for many years, the political participation was below the potential. Latinos did not vote, protest, contribute to campaigns, join parties, even join the PTA in proportion to their demographic potential. And yet people looked and they saw the demographic potential. So for election after election after election, Latinos were the sleeping giant, and political pundits were waiting for them to wake up. And to my small credit, I did say in October 2008 that I thought this might be the election, this might be the year, but I had no idea what kind of earth-shattering changes we were going to see in November 2008. In November 2004, 7.5 million Latinos voted. In 2008, 11 million Latinos voted. The sleeping giant woke up. They turned 4 states from red to blue. They had the competitive game between Republicans and Democrats for Latinos shifted dramatically in the Democrats' favor, and the rest is history. Judge Sotomayor, the possibility for immigration reform, I would say, in the Obama administration is now a question of not if, but when. And there is no question in my mind the Latinos are playing and are going to play an increasingly important, if not decisive, role in American politics. But that's not the same as saying, and now I'm going to shift back to the subject that Henry's been talking about, that's not necessarily the same as saying that all Latinos are going to integrate or assimilate successfully, right? Decisive role in American politics, great, very good, important, but we still have this question about are Latinos as a whole going to successfully become Americans, feel they belong in America, and move up into the mainstream? And I think that is still, in some ways, an open question, and I agree with Henry. It's what brings us together here. One of the most critical challenges we face as a nation, and a challenge that we must address. But what's interesting is that I think the two are related, and that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about how that sense of political belonging and political success, how that's related to broader dimensions of integration and assimilation. Because there are many different dimensions, right? If you think about what it means to go from a Mexican with a 7th grade education arriving on the border to do farm work to the next generation where your kid is potentially in college and on his way to being president or some version of that, that's a long, complicated process with many different dimensions. There's the process of getting that first job. There's the process of moving up the job ladder, the process of learning the language, getting an education, political engagement, buying your own home, becoming a citizen, getting a credit card, learning the banking system, eventually intermarrying, and then yet a very different kind of integration, coming to feel that you really belong here. So many different dimensions, complicated, complex life process. And people talk about it in a lot of different ways, and different kinds of experts focus on different pieces of this dimension. Some people focus on how are people doing socioeconomically. Others focus on, do you feel you belong? So I think it's most helpful to to understand those many different dimensions, to divide it into what I think of as the subjective dimensions and the objective dimensions. The dimensions that have to do with functioning, getting a job, moving up the socioeconomic ladder, and the subjective dimensions, the dimensions that have to do with belonging, feeling that you're American. Social mobility, again, that's the kind of functional half, versus do you think of America as us or them? John Fonte is a conservative who thinks about integration. He has a great analogy where he talks about a young Korean woman. When she thinks about the Civil War, does she think that as a war that they fought or a war that we fought for the values that we all believe in? And so the interesting question is, what's the relation between those subjective dimensions and the objective dimensions? Are they related? And, which one matters? And which one, if we're trying to do what Henry talks about, be the social engineers that try to encourage this, which ones should we be focusing on? And traditionally, it divides up as a left and right issue. The left tends to think that the functioning, objective dimensions are more important. Let's teach people how to move up on the job. Let's make sure they get job training. Let's make sure people can function in society. Whereas the right tends to focus on those belonging aspects. Do people feel they're Americans? Do they feel they fit in here? Are they adapting our values? Are they proud? Are they patriotic? And so there tends to be a kind of political split, which I think in either case fails to do justice to this complicated multidimensional process. Right? If we're just talking about getting a job and we're not talking about how people feel, I think we're missing half the picture. And if we just talk about how people feel and don't talk about getting a job, I think we're missing a huge part of the picture. Social scientists sometimes think of it as a question of stages. So you do that objective stuff first. It's the job first, then it's the language, then it's moving up on the job, and eventually you get to that belonging piece. And so that if you have that model, the belonging sort of becomes some kind of a pinnacle, and in some ways maybe a luxury, right, in that model, because you think that the other things are more important, and the belonging we can kind of leave till last because it's the last stage. And I would actually argue, what I'm trying to argue today is that both of those, or all three of those views are wrong. The left view, the right view, and the social scientist view. Because I think these two dimensions are integrally related and have to be integrally related from the beginning of the staged process, if you will. And I always think about it, I'm a former journalist. No journalist can give a talk without a taxi driver story. So I remember the taxi drivers I met once. I was actually on my way to Europe to give a talk about the American melting pot in Europe. And I was in a taxi, and I happened to have a Pakistani taxi driver. And he said, "Where are you going?" And we started to talk about it. And he was clearly a very educated man. And we started talking about what's the difference between immigrant integration in America and immigrant integration in Europe. And he, again, was a very educated man. He had cousins. He knew something about it. And as he started to describe his life, he said, I work 7 days a week. I have 2 PhDs, a chemical PhD, chemistry PhD, and a biology PhD. And I work 3 days a week at a scientist PhD job. But I compress a full-time job into 3 days a week. And the 3 other days a week, 3 other working days, I drive this taxi. And the 7th day I spend with my family. And the reason I'm working that hard, as opposed to many Muslim immigrants in Europe who are marginalized and not working, he says, the reason I'm working that hard is because my kids can grow up to be president. And the point is, his sense of that he belonged here and that he had a future here and that he was part of this society made him invest that way. And I think that's true for all immigrants, or immigrants who are lucky enough to have that feeling of belonging. Belonging is not something that you get to at the pinnacle of your striving. If you have a sense that you can belong, that motivates you to make that investment all along the way. If you feel that you're part of a team, you play harder. If you feel that you're trusted by the other team members and that you have a place in that team and that this is your place, you play in a very different way than if you feel you're not trusted and you're unsure of your place. And when you feel that your voice matters and you're part of the body politic, I think you have an incentive not just to learn the language and become a citizen and register and vote and pay attention to politics, but also to work hard, to make the most of your education, to invest in your work skills and move up on the job. So, I think that ironically is not quite the right word, miraculously, wonderfully, the political success we're seeing of Latinos in the last year, the amazing political miracle we're seeing, is actually going to have an effect on the successful integration of Latinos in coming years. Because if you have a sense of potential belonging and the possibility that your voice will be heard, I think that's likely to lead to investments along both the subjective and the objective dimensions of the integration game that are going to be critically important. But I think it does still leave us with two questions. If we have that model of how this is going to work going forward, it still leaves us with two questions. And one has to do with what is the proper balance, and proper balance is the wrong word, but what kind of balance are we going to see and what's going to be the most effective balance of identifying. Obviously what we're seeing now is Latinos are identifying as voters and having a role in American politics, but there's also a strong identification here as Latinos, right? As a voting bloc. As identifying with that part of people's identity is a paramount part of their identity. Now, ultimately, for most immigrants, that comes to be balanced with the sense that as important as our differences are in American society, what we have in common as Americans is more important than the differences. So if immigrants are coming in, if today's Latinos are the new pride, the new identification, the flavor of the year, if you will, is I'm going to have influence on American politics because I'm a Latino, is that eventually going to lead people to make the transition to I'm an American? There's a little bit of a complexity there. It's not necessarily a head-on conflict, but it's a complexity. But I think people on the right, I come out of a conservative universe, people on the right worry about that a lot. They say, they're identifying so strongly with their group, or they're never going to identify with the mainstream. And I think that's a mistake, because I think if you look at American history, almost every group has come. It's almost like the identity group, the ethnic group, what have you, is kind of the entry ramp to the highway. People through American history have almost always come in saying, I'm going to get into politics as an Irish American. I'm going to get into German American, Jews, whatever you have it. People start by identifying strongly with their group, learning the ways of their group, but that becomes an entry ramp into the larger society. So I think, when people look at what's happening with Latinos today, and some conservatives do look and get anxious about this, or they're identifying as Latinos, not as Americans, I think that's a mistaken fear, because if you look at history, that's always been a kind of, as I say, an entry ramp. But last question, the second question that I think what we're seeing, the phenomenon that we're seeing today raises, and this comes back to what Henry was saying, is what is the proper role and responsibility of the mainstream? We see this in this process where we see the many-dimensional integration and the subjective, if you will, belonging sense of integration in many ways leading and motivating and fueling the more objective efforts. And I agree with Henry that what we ultimately want is a society-wide effort, a national integration strategy, if you will. And I think it's even broader than that, because we don't want to just think of it as government doing it. I think we want a situation where where the churches, where American business, where American civil society, the unions, the political parties are all involved in helping immigrants become Americans, providing English classes, celebrating citizenship, the president using the bully pulpit to encourage integration, and this range of institutions involved in the game. So national strategy almost doesn't quite do justice to it, because national strategy sounds like something the government would do. I think this needs to be a society-wide effort. And the question is, how do we leverage that? How do we make that happen? No easy thing, right? It's easy to say, well, it's the national challenge, it's critical for the nation to do it. But how do we actually get all those different kinds of institutions in America doing this? You know, the Merage family does it out of its idealism and goodwill, but to get all of society making those kinds of investments, not easy. So I have a couple of provocative suggestions that come out of the analysis I've just given about how we might leverage that kind of activity. And the first is that I think if we focus on the subjective side rather than the objective side, we're likely to get more bang for our buck, so to speak, out of the taxpayer, or a more willing taxpayer involvement. I mean, after all, if you say to people, well, you've got this big laundry list of things that you're going to have to pay for, from English classes to job training to whatever, you're going to have a lot of resistance from the American taxpayer, particularly given where we are in the American fiscal history or the economy. But if we say, well, we're helping people become Americans, and by helping them into our body politic, helping them come to feel like Americans, helping them feel like they belong, if we focus on that political, civic, if you will, subjective side, I think we're likely to get a lot of buy-in from taxpayers. That's something I think taxpayers care a lot about and feel it's their responsibility to help with. Unlike helping people move up on the job, which I think that you're not necessarily going to get taxpayers to say, I think we should pay for job training for immigrants. I think you might get taxpayers to say, I think we want to help pay for helping immigrants become Americans. Second provocative suggestion related, I think if we present this as a matter of a group making special requests, or of victims with a grievance, or of people who are owed something, I think we're, as in the sort of old welfare model, or even old, in certain ways, civil rights model, I think we're going to have a lot of difficulty getting the mainstream to step up to the plate and foot the bill. On the other hand, if we present this as being about strivers who want to buy into that age-old immigrant bargain, again, not a charity, not a handout, but that bargain, again, I think we're likely to get a lot more willingness and openness on the part of that taxpayer getting out their wallet. So, and Henry defined the bargain one way. I mean, I think of it in very much the same terms. America offers the opportunity. Immigrants come and strive to achieve it. It's something that we do together, and it's a two-way street. And I think that concept of the immigrant bargain and of the mainstream and the immigrant being in it together for the welfare of the future of the country, that's the kind of language and metaphor and framing that we're going to be likely to get the mainstream to buy into and be willing to pay for and be willing to make the kind of investments that I think we're going to need to see in the next generation to make the kind of integration that we're all hoping for happen. So, in closing, the last 9 months, the last year, really has been kind of a watershed in American politics. I think we're all going to look back someday and we're going to say that was the time when the sleeping giant awoke, and that's hugely important. And I think not just for American politics, but for the potential of Latino integration for years, if not literally, a generation to come. I think what we do have to do next, as Henry pointed out, the next step, immediate, urgent step, is legalize those 12 million people who are still waiting outside the body politic. And then I think society as a whole has to face up to this challenge about what is our responsibility to make sure that the immigrant bargain does work for the generation going forward. But the thing that Henry and I share, I think, in addition to our concern about this issue, is our optimism. I believe that once we get over the legalization problem, America will focus on this issue and realize that immigrants are our future and step up to the plate and reaffirm the immigrant bargain. And by quoting a phrase of Henry that always lingers with me, I think when we do realize this and step up to the plate, the good news will be that our best years lie ahead.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor for me to be here. Thanks to the Woodrow Wilson Center and the Merage Foundations. I've spent the last 15 years or so of my working career in philanthropy, working in private foundations. So this is actually my first outing on the other side of the aisle, no longer as a foundation officer. So I hope that my jokes are funny and that people laugh. When you work at a foundation, it's amazing. Every single one of your jokes is funny, and you're the cleverest person, and you have the answers to all the issues, and everyone wants to implement exactly what you say you want them to do. Tamar mentioned that you have to be careful with Henry talking you into things. He recently wrote me in to heading up this new organization called Our Pledge that he and Tamar and several other people have been instrumental in conceiving, developing, and actually starting. It's a very, Henry and I talked. It was supposed to take up, part of my time, a significant amount of my time, but not all my time. Now I find that it takes up, except for the time that I'm feeding and bathing my 4-year-old twins, the rest of the time is dedicated to working and thinking on Our Pledge. I think it's an organization that's coming at a very critical time, and I'll get in my comments a little bit further some of the specific ideas that Our Pledge wants to pursue, building off of the comments that both Henry and Tamar have said. Now, you need to know that I have my first board meeting this afternoon. Henry and Tamar are two of my board members, so they're going to get a little bit of preview of some of the comments that I'll make this afternoon. I also need to be careful with what I'm going to say next, because I don't want to tick them off. But I want to keep my comments very brief. For me, one of the biggest values of sessions like this is discussion and not just listening to talking heads. And I recently took a class at Columbia on sociology and education. And I hadn't been in a classroom in a long, long time, and it's amazing how pedagogical strategies have changed, and how you hardly ever now get any, lectures from a, professor standing or sitting and reading off his notes, but it's much more interactive and dynamic, and I think that much richer. So let me try to be very brief so we can get into a discussion. We've heard a lot of examples, a lot of statistics. I just want to give two more as illustrative examples of some of the issues and challenges facing immigrant integration. This has to do with English acquisition. Currently, there are over 14 million U.S. residents who are limited English proficient. That they cannot function sufficiently well in English to be able to lead productive or integrated lives in this country. What's one of the best ways for you to improve your English is through ESL classes at all levels, through adult education, in schools for children of immigrants, workplace programs, etc. But ESL funding, particularly at state and federal level, has not kept up with the demand. For example, Massachusetts today, 180,000 residents of the state, 180,000 just in Massachusetts, not one of the largest states, are on waiting lists for English language ESL classes, and the waiting time varies from 6 months to 2 years. I think this example bears out in in most other places around the country. So what is Our Pledge going to do about it? Of course, we're going to fund every single program to be able to get everybody in classes, particularly in this easy economy to raise money both from governments and private sources. But Our Pledge is going to work. It's going to try to develop strategies to help both with English language acquisition and the whole range of other activities related to integration from both a structural perspective as well as a subjective perspective, as Tamar talked about. Working off of Henry's and Tamar's comments, I have a definition of immigrant integration that I think could be useful in guiding this. And actually, I look forward to your comments, critiques, and additions to this when we get into this discussion period, particularly since I have my board meeting later today, and this will come up there. Immigrant integration is a dynamic, two-way process which newcomers and the receiving society work together to build secure, vibrant, and cohesive communities. So it goes both ways. As an intentional effort, integration engages and transforms all community members, reaping shared benefits and creating a new whole that is greater than the sum of the parts. Mutual responsibility, multi-sector involvement, and multi-strategy approaches should be the cornerstones of any integration effort. And that's, I think, where our pledge as a national, new national initiative can come in and play a strong role. Of course, there are many organizations working on different aspects of the issue. You have incredibly powerful and smart networks around education, around children and families, around housing, around immigration reform, around civic participation. But there are many, at the community level, there are many community-based organizations, CBOs, who are struggling to see how can they best serve their constituents, particularly around integration efforts. And as we think through what we can do for this, there are several pathways to integration that bear considering. I want to talk about 6 strategies or 6 strategic pathways, 6 strategies where all stakeholders will work together to leverage immigrants' human capital to benefit the entire society. Here we get to a lot of the issues that Tamar was alluding to. And immigrant integration efforts draw upon myriad strategies from organizing and advocacy to research and communication. Pathway number 1, where there's the newcomer aspect to it and the receiving community aspect to it, is community-wide planning. Where there's an intentional and inclusive planning that allows newcomers and longtime residents to work together to facilitate immigrant integration and promote overall safety, health, and well-being of communities. The newcomer community seeks opportunities to participate actively in broad community planning endeavors. The receiving community systematically engages newcomers in those community planning efforts. Second pathway around language and education, where we need to eliminate language barriers, promote English proficiency, and provide education opportunities for key successful integration. On the newcomer community side, learning English while maintaining native language. On the receiving community, offer quality English classes and ensure access to those who need it and request it. On the newcomer community side, utilize and support school systems. On the receiving community side, provide equitable access to quality education. Pathway number 3, health, well-being, and economic mobility. We need to support programs that promote health, well-being, economic mobility as essential to helping immigrants establish a foothold and to strengthen the broader community at the same time. On the newcomer community side, strive to be self-sufficient and to support your family. On the receiving community side, provide services that help self-sufficiency, job training, healthcare, housing, etc. One thing that I want to note here when we talk about receiving community, I'm not talking government, or I'm not talking solely government. I'm talking government, I'm talking community-based organizations, I'm talking private sector, I'm talking private philanthropy. So I think it's important to see, particularly nowadays, that this isn't an appeal to a to create a larger benefits and entitlement scheme, but really, going down deeper into what a receiving community in all its aspects entails. Okay, pathway number, still in pathway number 3, health, well-being, and economic mobility. On the newcomer community side, contribute to the economy by working, paying taxes, and starting new businesses. On the receiving community side, offer access to training opportunities, living wage jobs, and support for entrepreneurship. Pathway number 4, equal treatment and opportunity, where we want to promote fair laws and policies which are critical to build as building blocks for successful integration. On the newcomer community side, be responsible community and contributing community members, and help promote equal treatment and opportunity for all. On the receiving community side, enact and enforce laws that promote equal treatment and opportunity and provide resources to protect newcomers' rights, legal assistance, anti-profiling measures, etc. Pathway number 5, social and cultural interaction. This type of interaction fosters understanding and creates a sense of belonging and facilitates mutual engagement. On the newcomer community side, adapt to a new culture without losing your identity. On the receiving community side, learn about and respect diverse cultures. On the newcomer community side, engage with longtime residents to promote and to contribute to the common good. On the receiving community side, engage with newcomers to promote and to find the common good. And finally, pathway number 6, citizenship and civic participation, where we promote opportunities for newcomers to participate in civic life that are vital for a strong, vibrant community. On the newcomer community side, commit to new community, learn about civic process, and engage in life of the broader community. This doesn't mean only, voting, but it means getting involved in your child's school, getting involved in different aspects of your local community, whether it be a homeowners association, whether it be a neighborhood group. Of course, voting, and also making your voice heard, not just at the polls, but throughout the months and years before you're elected officials. On the receiving community side, is promote citizenship and opportunities for community participation, and also respect the right to organize, not just necessarily workplace organizing, but all other types of organizing. As our pledge moves forward, we're going to try to flesh these out and develop specific strategies in order to try to achieve some of these things. Of course, if the board decides that that's what we should be doing. Some of the specific things, I think, working with the different sectors, working with community-based organizations, we see ourselves as offering the chance to be an aggregator, to help community-based organizations that are struggling with some of these issues and working with their constituents and clients to provide some of these strategies for pathways for integration. We will work with government or different government entities or efforts. For example, is there a role that we can play in the upcoming census in 2010 as far as advising on how to reach out and how to make sure that immigrants, new citizens, get counted? Working with the private sector, not only corporations, small and big, but also foundations, to promote strategies that help with integration, to work with those funders who have supported a lot of issues around immigrant rights and immigration reform, to take the next step of working with these populations in order to get them fully integrated into their communities, and ultimately to work with individuals to provide services or to see what their needs are, and to amplify some of the strategies that are needed for them to move forward. At this point, let me wrap up. We have, I guess, about 45 minutes for discussion, and I would like to end once again thanking particularly Henry Tamar, Merage Foundations, and the Wilson Center. Ask you for your help with this new exciting endeavor. Those of you that are on the receiving community sides, whether it be private sector, government, community-based organization, etc., I welcome your ideas, your collaboration, your help. And since we have with us today the Merage Fellows, I'd like to talk to some of you at some point today or in the future. As we build up the organization, why not take advantage of some of the talent that has already been identified, discovered, and being nurtured? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have about 45 minutes for discussion and questions. This event is being webcast, and it will be available for viewing on our website. So I ask that you speak in a microphone and also state your name and your organization or affiliation. There's a question right over here in the back of the room.
Hi, my name is Peter Goldmark. I'm working on climate for the Environmental Defense Fund these days. First of all, it's fun, Henry, to hear you again. I haven't heard the fluency and the generosity of the portrait of America you paint. I think is virtually without equal in this country, and that is a wonderful thing for all of us.
Peter Goldmark used to be president of the Rockefeller Foundation.
That was during the American Civil War.
and then he ran the New York Times-owned International Herald.
Well, I ran it when it was jointly owned by the Post and the Times.
Okay, in Paris. So this is quite a guy. I didn't see you back there.
So here's my challenge. Tamar and Antonio, you are new to me. My fault, not yours. You reminded us all...
Sorry to interrupt. Jacqueline Novogratz is one of my mentors.
Voila. It's a small world. You reminded us of the bargain. You urged us to renew the bargain. You reminded us that Latinos and all immigrants will be central to the engine of growth going forward. So what I'd like to invite you to add to that, I had a couple of times as I listened the feeling, are they talking about old growth or new growth? Are they talking about the bargain as we knew it before the past few years or the bargain as it will have to be afterwards? One of the lucky things for all of us who serve with Paul on this board is we get to interview some of these fellows each year, and many of them, I think, are a little bit ahead of us. They understand the bargain may be different. So what I'm suggesting is that growth will not be the same as we knew it. There are 4 basic funnels of opportunity in this country, which most immigrants and minorities rode to progress, I'm going to say roughly, in the 50 years after World War II. I see Safi nodding. I'm going to be very crude here. And they were the military, the healthcare system, state and local government, and higher education. We have interfered or blocked some of those funnels to different degrees, usually unconsciously, because we didn't understand they were the major funnels of growth. The character of growth, for environmental reasons, for economic reasons, is not going to be the same as we knew it before. The United States, in the way its economy functions, the kind of opportunity and the character of the offer in the bargain, I think will be different. And I think all Americans, both the new ones and the old ones, will need help in understanding some of those changes. It's not quite go find the old bargain and just do it again. So there's an opening for it.
I'm not sure what you mean, actually. What's the change? Are you talking about the economy is different, or are you talking? What are you?
Well, the economy, Tamara, has changed in the past year.
Right, but is that what you're talking about?
That is one of the things I'm talking about. I'm talking about all the other things. I'm talking about the arrest in the growth of state and local government, which is a major funnel. I'm talking about the fact that both here and elsewhere we would not be able to add tens of millions of people in this with the same environmental footprint and economic behavior that we had. I'm talking about the decline of leverage and debt. Many of you used the word leverage, a word we all use. But that will mean different things. And I'm talking about the fact that I don't think the United States or the rest of the world, but the U.S. particularly, will be able to go forward with the discrepancies in wealth that we allowed to develop over the past 10 or 15 years. So I'm talking about many things, and I sort of ducked going into them one by one because, like everybody else, I want to hear what the fellows have to say about this. What I'm suggesting in the large is that as we talk about this, and particularly the challenge all of you are talking about, we need to help America understand that the new bargain may not simply be the old one on both sides.
That's very possible.
Sorry for talking so long. I don't know how to turn that off.
It's very possible, Peter, that what you, I mean, clearly there is massive change, and one can envision scenarios in which the kind of change, economic change, global interactions, climate-related issues, and so forth, work against the immigrant bargain as we know it today, because the economy simply doesn't either have the carrying capacity or it has changed in its skill requirements, so that technology jobs are not suited to immigrants who have arrived here as laborers and as farm workers. And the next iteration of the technology economy, which many suggest will be the dominant theme of the next century, which is biosciences, healthcare, biotechnology, is also not suited to people who are not skilled. So one of the big conundrums is this segmentation, if you will, between where what the economy requires and what the 12 million who are here in an undocumented capacity have as skills. Hence the reason for the importance of bridging with education, with skills, with good public education, with K through 16 strategies and so forth. But even that may not be enough in a generation. The great promise in the climate issues is the serious way people are addressing alternative energy strategies, which may create jobs not unlike the manufacturing jobs of the last century, of the last 50 years, if indeed we focus on wind turbines and new public mass transit and alternative energy, major solar industries across the country in a serious way to produce large sums of the energy capacity that we need, etc. It may be that those not only revitalize some of our Rust Belt communities, but attract immigrants to those places with the skills that allow them to be involved in the manufacturing process. I mean, that is a real possibility. More and more people are talking about the alternative energy sector as a real major sector in the American society, and it feels like the old manufacturing. It feels like producing heavy industry, hard things, which some of the immigrants may be able to do. I don't know whether that speaks to your agenda at all, but
yeah, and I'm very struck by what you say. I'd actually like to hear more about it. I mean, it sounds like you're talking about changes that are so big in American society that they go well beyond we're all going to have to adjust, not just the immigrants. And I think that is what you're getting at. But I mean, what I would just say is kind of a footnote to what Henry just said. I mean, what we've seen, I study very close up and work very close up with today's the undocumented and today's low-end immigrant wave. And, the point is, even in a society that's growing much more technologically sophisticated, we still need a service sector, and arguably we need even more of a service sector. I mean, people used to, women used to stay home and keep the house and cook dinner. Now people go to fast food restaurants, and that's why fast food restaurant sector has been one of the fastest growing part of the private sector, for good or for ill. We don't want immigrants to come and be stuck in that kind of a job, but people come and that they work there, and then they do gradually move up, and their kids go on to a next stage. One of the things, one of the sectors I work closely with is construction. Obviously the housing boom is not going to happen again for a while, but there's a huge gap still there was a gap in a need of economic, labor demand at the low end of construction work. Increasingly what people are projecting for the next, several decades is a labor need at the high end of construction skills. The slightly more skilled construction workers, predictions of huge gaps. And what I imagine is a lot of the immigrants who came and started at the low end and have been very productive in the last several decades at the low end are going to gradually move up and be in that next higher tier of construction. So, I still see that there's potentially, even as the economy changes dramatically, potential ladders up through the economy for the kind of job mobility and integration that we've seen in the past. You know, the sectors may change, but I'm not sure that that dynamic is necessarily going to change.
At the risk of keeping other people from speaking, let me just add one quick thought. It is true, Peter, many things will change, and I do think we live in an era of profound change, and President Obama is in some respects a symbol of the multiple dimensions of tectonic shifts that have occurred in our society. Generationally, that the election spoke to generational change, multicultural change, economic shifts. There was a lot going on that made that change. But some things won't change. And one of them is that we need to figure out how to employ the reality of 430 million Americans, not the 300 that we have today, but the 430 that are going to be here. There is no wishing that away. There is no, I mean, you could, as I said earlier, you could close the border today and we'd still have 430 million Americans and they'd still be constituted much like I've described. Which means that the environmental movement and the immigrant advocates and the society as a whole will have to come to terms with how we manage environmentally and still provide a living for 130 million more people. And the debate that people like Governor Lamb in the 1990s fomented along the lines of the country doesn't have carrying capacity, we've got to shut the borders, enemies of immigration in some respects, is just a mistaken logic. We've got to find a new kind of basis for the discussion that allows us to face the reality of growth, which is a good thing in any society. The Japanese are going to discover what it means to grow old and have no one to replace in their society and shrink. They are now declining in population officially. The size of the Japanese population is declining, and the population that is left is going to be considerably older. How does a society function that way? And how we do that and deal with climate issues is a challenge.
We have a question over here, up in the front.
There may be comments on that last discussion from the number of hands that are up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Faye Williams. I'm National Chair of the National Congress of Black Women, and I want to thank you for allowing me to participate today. I have indeed learned much, but I guess I was struck before coming by the title of Latinos in Our Nation's Future. And I immediately began to ask questions of, like, where do I fit in? I'm a biracial child, but I was reared as a Black American, you know. And where do I fit in? How can I help? What can I contribute? How can my community benefit? And I've been disappointed that I didn't hear that. I was especially concerned about some of the statements that you made, Mr. Jacoby, and it had to do with our finding, you know, being involved when our voice matters. And I guess in our community, I've had to do it the other way around. We've had to be involved so that our voice would matter. And, you know, we're just beginning to believe that has happened as a result of the election this past year. Another statement, and I hope I misunderstood the meaning of some of this. You must, something about belonging and your values. We come from a different place because our values were destroyed, and we're in a period of rebuilding our values. So we have to strive to belong, but we also have to strive to rebuild our values. I don't think others in this country have that problem. And last, you referred to the old civil rights model. And as a Black American, I think about how my parents, my grandparents, and great-grandparents worked for the benefit of this entire country, and that this country benefits from the civil rights movement, whether it's fair housing, whether it's voting rights, whatever. All kinds of people benefit from what they did. And I guess I felt that you were diminishing the civil rights movement. Tell me, I misunderstood you.
Yes, you certainly misunderstood me. The civil rights movement was one of the most glorious periods of American history, and you certainly misunderstood me.
But you raise a very serious set of questions, and that is, as these numbers change, what does it mean for other Americans who are not immigrants, but who are poor and have not been properly integrated into American society, particularly African Americans, who in many ways have been the most marginalized of America's citizens. Because the racism perpetrated against African Americans has been more intense and serious than any other, against any other group in history, in American history, and it doesn't end. It hasn't ended. The election notwithstanding. So one of the critical questions is, and I don't have answers for these, but what does it mean for African Americans that they're going to grow by 25 million in the period that I've described, and Latinos are going to grow by 63 million? Latinos are already 44 million or so, 40-ish million in the country, and African Americans something like 36 or so. So Latinos are already more numerous and going to grow almost 3 times as fast in the years ahead. What does that mean for African Americans? Well, one could postulate all kinds of different trajectories. African Americans have achieved a plateau that Latinos have not in the presidency, for example, and in influence in the culture in many ways. And but what does it mean going forward if the numbers change as dramatically as they will? These are not, kind of speculative abstract numbers. These are real numbers. This is what the census says is going to be, and there's almost no way that changes given what's in the DNA of the population now. So that's a very, very serious set of questions. We have seen in communities across the country the relationship between new immigrants and African Americans, Latinos and immigrants, sometimes work and sometimes be very difficult. They work in places where there's kind of bargaining, i.e. Chicago. It's rough, but it works. And then other places where it hasn't worked as well in Liberty City in Miami was an example of the friction between African Americans and Cuban Americans. So these are very difficult questions going forward and certainly have to be part of this discussion. This today was titled Latinos in the American Future because I think it was a session designed to focus on that particular aspect of the immigrant story, which is the large Latino numbers, and that's the only reason why that was done. I chose to focus the book on that because it is an important piece of this equation. As I say, the central theme of the book is this is no longer about doing something for Latinos out of compassion or humanitarian reasons, but figuring this out because the future of the country, it will bear mightily on the future of the country, as will the full integration of African Americans beyond a few people in high positions. First African American woman is about to become head of a Fortune 500 company, etc. But dealing with the reality of wasted lives in gangs in central city neighborhoods, drugs, too many children lost to teenage pregnancy too early from their career potential. All of these questions have to be addressed going forward.
And I think I think I accept Peter Goldmark's challenge to think differently, and I think part of it is related to your comments, is where structural racism has primarily had a detrimental impact on the African American community. How does this changing demographic, and how do issues around integration, you need to be careful, as well-intentioned as you are, of unintended consequences. So what effect will this have, and we need to keep it in mind, on the dynamics of structural racism, particularly vis-a-vis the African American community?
Well, just the one thing I would add, because it was my remarks that you were particularly concerned about. I think my model of at a group that feels like they are full members of a society or of a body politic are that is a motivator to do even better in some of those dimensions of integration that are about what about achievement, I think that has been true in the black community as well. When blacks felt that they weren't that they were for structural reasons in many ways left out of being of America or full American equality, that did make it hard to continue to achieve in the same way, to work as hard. If you thought you couldn't get to be president, that limited how hard you tried. Now that people are fully aware that they can be president, that is, I think, going to be motivating for a lot of people. Do you disagree with that?
No, I don't. I just don't want you to forget the other discussion in terms of African Americans are concerned about collaboration is really what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about competition. I'm talking about collaborating so that we can do this even better. I've been blessed. I've earned 3 doctorate degrees in my life. You know, I still in some ways feel left out, but I also am looking for how can I work together with others for the good of those who come after me. That's what I thought was missing from the conversation, and I had hoped we would have some of that.
I think it should have been part of my remarks that an aspect of immigrant evolution is the interrelationship with other groups in America who've not yet been fully integrated. I think that's a valid point.
Okay. All right, we've got a question up here and right over here in the white shirt.
Hi, Jim Lowen, author of Sundown Towns, among other things. I think there's a elephant in the room that we haven't really discussed, and that is the illegality of lots of our Latino immigrants, including those to come. And I think our policy, or lack thereof, currently rewards that behavior. That is, if somebody's from Mexico or Salvador or whatever, the first thing they need to do to make it in our society is know someone illegal or figure out how to get into the country illegally. And I'm wondering, wouldn't it be better if we required them, say, to learn English well or to have a good high school degree, and then they'd have 2 pluses, or 1 plus, depending on which we required, toward the integration into our society that I fully support. Instead, it seems like our lack of policy is rewarding just the opposite. So instead, they have a minus that makes it more difficult for them to sign up even for the census, let alone sign up for ESL courses or anything else like that, because they are, of course, shy about signing up for these things because they are not in the country legally.
Well, they aren't. Well, some of them are shy, but they aren't those that do want to sign up need to then wait years before they can get the classes that they're searching. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think one of the biggest problems has been the lack of a cohesive immigration policy. I think that there's a lot of positive movement in order to develop that going forward. Whether we require, as a condition of, becoming a legal resident and ultimately a citizen at the outset, a certain level of education and English proficiency is a matter that's among discussion among many of the advocates. Whether you do it, will that halt others from coming in? Without that, I don't know. And if you do it, are the resources and the will there to provide those resources in order to be able to have that happen? I don't know that either. One thing that you point out, though, is that the current broken system does reward those who, for lack of a better phrase, don't play by the rules, and has created immense conflicts within different immigrant communities. For example, a lot of Asian American residents who play by the rules have been waiting, where they apply for visas for their relatives to be able to bring their relatives, wait 15, 20, 25 years in the queue in order to bring them. They feel that they've been cheated if all of a sudden there's a legalization program that rewards those who jumped the line and came here. So these are very difficult issues that the immigrants' rights advocates are struggling with. I think you raise very important points that are under serious discussion in those sectors.
The only thing I would say is that we have a mess on our hands as a result of the lack of policy that you described. And a legacy of that mess is 12 million people in the country. Mm-hmm. So the formulation for immigration reform, which I think has held up bipartisanly, it was President Bush's formulation, it is President Obama's formulation, it is the one that I believe must hold together to eventually pass, has 3 elements. 1, border security. A nation, in order to be a nation, has to have control of its borders. you're not a nation. If you don't have a place on the ground that says this is where we start, this is where we end, we have a right to decide who comes in or not. Secondly, a guest worker program, because we need the workers. That is a factual reality, and it is inhumane to leave 12 million people in the shadows in an illegal status. So some kind of legalization of their status in a guest worker format. And then the third piece is a transition to citizenship, where the things that you mentioned, some kind of testing of whether or not you're prepared to accept the full dimensions of citizenship, enables you to go there. But absent that third piece, then we create the apartheid-like reality of a group of people who are legal in the country but have secondary status in the country in perpetuity. So some mechanism for transition to citizenship is an essential piece. These three have to hold together, and they're the eventual solution to what you described. Not perfect, dealing with the reality of a mess, right? But they go backward and try to clean up that mess, and then set standards of border control going forward.
Okay, we have a question in the back. I think it's one of our Merage fellows in the back. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Rene Flores. I'm a PhD student from Princeton University. And I think that the distinction between subjective simulation and objective simulation, I think, is very useful and productive, right? Thinking subjective simulation is more of this cultural simulation, feeling that you belong, and objective more about socioeconomic mobility, right? My only concern would be that emphasizing too much this subjective element really neglects the historical record, or neglects the research that has been done with regards to immigration. For example, some researchers at the University of UCLA, they followed Mexican Americans since the 60s in two different cities, Los Angeles and San Antonio. And they basically discovered that, Mexican Americans have been assimilating quite rapidly. They learn English, they're more patriotic than the baseline population. But when it comes to the socioeconomic mobility, they have had very little of that. And we also can look at the historical record. For example, the Jewish population of 100 years ago, they achieved socioeconomic mobility before they integrated into the cultural parts of society. And so I think that would be something that I would like the panel to discuss, if that's possible.
Yeah, interesting question and discussion of it. I think the two have to go hand in hand. And I think the problem is that in many current discussions, the one side gets left out, or the subjective side gets left out, or gets seen as kind of a luxury that we don't have to think about, and it will sort of take care of itself. And if we just teach people how to navigate around in society and get a credit card and, move up on the job, the rest will be fine. And so I think, so I'm not saying let's do one at the expense of the other. I'm actually saying that the two need to be integrally related. But when I think about what I think taxpayers are going to be willing to pay for, I think English and civic belonging is going to be something that taxpayers feel is more their responsibility to pay for than they're going to say, well, do I really need to help people get a credit card or move up on the job? I think the banks may want to help people get a credit card or move up on the job, or at least get a credit card. But I think, I think for it to happen, there's no question, you need both. And the point, and I was really just trying to, in my discussion, in my remarks, kind of let's remind people, let's not get out of balance in the way we think about it. But then in the second piece, what can we actually leverage society to do? I think we're going to have more success if we focus on, and again, English is a tricky one, right? Because English sort of bridges both. English is part of the subjective, but also the key, arguably, to the objective. I think, to the degree we're going to get the taxpayer to pay for much, it's going to be civic participation in English, and not probably job training or social mobility. But
I think Tamar's right as a political argument, as the case that needs to be made to the American people, that people are nervous about separatism. They're nervous about ethnic enclaves. They're nervous about Quebec-type futures. They're nervous about strange voices in their communities, etc. They're nervous about the evidence of dramatically different cultures within their neighborhood settings. We see this not just in California, but in Georgia and North Carolina and Tennessee and Pennsylvania and other places. So the case must include the fact that the immigrants want to be Americans. That kind of a basic element of the argument, it seems to me, is we want what this society offers. We're willing to do our part, but we've also made a break with other allegiances in order to commit to the American future. People want to hear that at some level. And hence the name that we selected, at least working name for this entity we're calling Our Pledge, is based on what? Our pledge of allegiance. We pledge allegiance. So that's an old school, even difficult concept in modern PC parlance, but it's kind of basic in, are you with us or not? Are you in or not? Are you committed for the long haul or not? You still harbor some kind of Pan-American notion of back and forth, borderless nation. If that's probably not going to work as a case for the American people, because there is, sovereignty and nationhood involved, and that's kind of, the step you take. It's not asking too much, given the benefits that this society can offer. So.
But I'm actually arguing a step further than that. I'm not seeing it just as something we're going to sort of do to keep Lou Dobbs happy. I'm saying that if immigrants don't feel that way, it's going to limit how well they do in American society. If you don't feel you belong here, and you're always thinking, I mean, again, Mexican immigrant families I spend a lot of time around. There comes a certain point where the beginning you're sending a lot of money home to build that house back in that village that you come from, and in the first 5 years, first you're sending it to your mother, and then you're sending it to build a house. Well, there's a point where you got to save that money so your kid can go to college. And so, where the subjective way that you think of where you belong really matters. And it's when you start to think you belong here that you start to make the investments here that are really going to matter, not just for your subjective state and not just for Lou Dobbs, but how well you're going to do here.
Tamar, when you were speaking, I had a thought for your question for you, and that is whether there isn't, now I'm back to the political argument, now I'm back to the kind of the practical case part of it. Whether another part of the practical case, aside from, I want to see that you've committed, is the economic argument. Who's going to, kind of take care of the old folks in the nursing home? Who's going to be the workers in sensitive jobs? Is that a persuasive part of this argument to Americans?
I think it's moderately persuasive. I don't think people don't quite see that yet. I think they don't believe it's just going to be Latinos doing it, and they don't quite see it yet. Even the Social Security argument, it should be much more persuasive than it is, but it doesn't quite get the traction that you and I think it should. I mean, maybe we have to work on it better and make the argument better, but I don't yet see it being, I don't see a lot of, Lou Dobbs doesn't say, oh yeah, they're going to pay for my Social Security, it's fine.
Got a question over here on the side in the white suit.
Hello, everyone. My name is Armand Jahangri. I'm one of the fellows from 2008, and I'm currently a medical student in Dallas, Texas at UT Southwestern. I grew up since 11, I moved to Houston, Texas, and I grew up in Harris County. And one of the biggest problems in Harris County near Houston is that the immigrant population has no access to health care. And with the 130 million people that are being added to our population, I wanted to see your views of how we would approach healthcare to these new the immigrant population or the minority population that's uprising, and what sort of solutions you see to that, because the human struggle is with medicine and the body versus the mind, and if we don't have access to healthcare for the people that live in the States today, what happens when we add 130 million people on top of that? Thank you.
Well, you raise a very serious question, and perhaps the area in social services where the anti-immigrant advocates have the greatest force, as in Houston, where the emergency rooms are overloaded, where the county is paying huge sums of money, and they can actually document how much of that is for illegals, including the children of undocumented. And where even a progressive county commissioner, Sylvia Garcia in Harris County, a Hispanic woman, progressive Democrat, has been forced to argue for strategies to offset the costs of health care for undocumenteds because it is so obvious and so clear. They do not have other health care options. They come to the emergency room. The answers lie in the kind of health care reform that's being discussed right now and by the administration, as well as the integration or the match of immigration reform. Once people are, quote, legalized in the form of guest workers, they will have ways to have their income taxed for their portion of health care, et cetera. But it's another example of where when people are out in the shadows and for economic purposes, for legal purposes, but yet are human beings, so they get sick, they get injured on the job, there's just realities that don't match in the present framework.
Okay. All right, we've got a question right up here in the front.
Thank you. Klaus Botzet. I'm working at the State Department currently, but I'm wearing a double hat. I'm a German exchange diplomat, so I will be looking at internal and justice affairs here in the States, and I've dealt with immigration to Germany before that in my career. There is a piece of information I'd like to add and a question related to that. Germany has adopted a national immigration strategy in 2005, which basically consists of compulsory language courses for all immigrants. And the good news is these courses are embraced more or less enthusiastically. The reaction of a large majority is very positive. The question now relates to the smaller portion of people who actually do not want to fully integrate, who want to preserve their cultural background very decidedly. They do not want to become Germans, or in this case here in the States, Americans. They have a different concept of relations between gender. They don't want to adopt the Western style of relations between sexes. They don't share the legal concept. So what are your answers to this problem? Thank you.
Well, it's a very interesting issue, and I would like to question you back on let him keep the mic, because I want to ask him some questions about Germany, make sure I've got my sense of the German situation correct. But interesting, a friend of mine went to Germany some years ago and was discussing immigration at a late night after dinner and wine, and the German host said, "You Americans are lucky. Your immigrants are so much like you." And what he was referring to was the kind of similar Judeo-Christian base, and Latinos, for example, the largest of the immigrant groups in the United States, are different from Americans. Most Americans wouldn't say Latinos are like us, but to the rest of the world, the similarity is greater than what they confront with their immigrants in other societies. There's an interesting juxtaposition. I do believe that, here's what I believe about the American case. I do not encounter a lot of people, at least in the traditional immigrants that I know. There may be new immigrants from other parts of the world for whom this point doesn't apply, but for most immigrants that I recognize in the United States, they cannot long fend off the power of American culture. It's just so powerful. I mean, I go to places like the Texas Rio Grande Valley, which is 95% Latino, and every little boy wants to be Tony Romo, the coach. The quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, and they're running around with a big star on their T-shirts. I mean, you know, they're very quickly integrating into the kind of the cultural draws that are more powerful than any political declaration or even economic incentives. Music, sports, school life, draw them in. So there's not many immigrants who stay here and can control what the second generation. You know, I mean, they're well integrated into the at least into the cultural draw of American life by the second generation. I don't think that's as big an issue in the immigrants that I know within the United States. We don't have yet people who are, isolating into hard enclaves and say we're going to hold out. My grandfather lived to 93 years of age. He came from Mexico in 1926. Now, he himself could never allowed himself to become a United States citizen because he believed that you had to actually utter the words of rejection of your home country in order to become a United States citizen, and he couldn't bring himself to do that. He was so of Mexico that he lived here until 93 years of age and died a Mexican citizen. But he had 7 children, 5 of them were sons. All 5 of them served in World War II. All 5 were in the armed forces of the United States, and one of them rose to the rank of colonel, all political figures, etc. So, American culture is just so powerful that immigrants really don't stand up against it. Even those, as Tamar said, who have intentions, and I know them in California. I'm saving money so I can go back when I retire. They don't go back when they retire because they've had children and grandchildren. They want to be near their grandchildren in the Inland Empire in Los Angeles. So that just doesn't work in this country.
Yeah, and I want to. I want to recognize the difficulty of the European challenge. I mean, I spend a lot of time in Europe talking about integration and talking about are the models comparable. And I think Henry's on to something that we do have it easier in a lot of ways because of who our immigrants are and their relation to our culture, and also because we have the tradition of doing it and thinking of ourselves as an immigrant country, which obviously Europe doesn't. And I sometimes say, there's sort of the analogy of somebody who knows the words to a song and someone who can hum the tune. I think in a way Europe is almost doing better by knowing the words of this song. I mean, we don't have English training for all of the newcomers. You do, and several other European countries do much better than we do at providing the programs. So those are sort of the words of the song, but somehow we know the music about how do you create a society that's where you can be different and yet belong. But that aside, I think you do have a challenge in the sense of your immigrants are bringing radically different values in a way that ours are not. And the way that America has traditionally handled that complexity in the past is that, and we didn't have it as hard, let's grant that, but was that we never said, in order to become an American, you have to buy into XYZ values. Our requirements have always been, you have to come and play by the rules in the sense of you have to obey the law. You have to obey the law, basically. And they were.
The law may include gender issues.
The law may include gender issues, but the law is pretty minimal. We don't say come here and buy into our way of our habits. We don't say you have to like either rock and roll or Herman Melville. We don't say you have to eat certain kinds of foods. We don't say you have to live a certain way. We don't say you have to even believe in opportunity society. We say you come in and you abide by certain minimal things. That's about political tolerance, and it's about democracy, and it's about and they're minimal, but I would argue over time they're transformative. And so it's people come and they sort of play by the very minimal rules of the legal rules, and eventually their attitudes change. And my favorite example of that is a Pew Hispanic Center study that has looked in recent years that looked at Hispanics whether they believed that fate or free will was the determining factor in their lives. And if you looked at people who were here so recently, they were still Spanish dominant, they all believed that fate was the determining factor. And if you looked at people who were here long enough that they learned English, they'd come to think that free will was the determining factor. Now, we don't have classes in fate and free will. That's not on the citizenship test, do you believe in fate or free will? But by coming and living in playing by the minimal rules and living in the society, your values change. And I mean, again, with all due, understanding how much more difficult it is in Europe, and that's not a policy prescription, but I would argue that a system that's based on sort of minimal behavioral rules and gender might be one of them. And then people might have to sort of say, am I going to live by that rule or not? Am I going to go home? And I would say maybe minimum changes in the rules for that. Do I believe in having hospitals where only one gender? I don't think so. I wouldn't change that. So they have to accommodate or not. But not trying to change people's values, minimal but transformative laws.
Wouldn't you say that the immigrant tradition is a big part of this, the fact that we've been at it for a long time, in the sense that when you say become an American, becoming an American is becoming a part of a great mixed cultural mix, but becoming a German, that means a different thing. Or at least my understanding is that Germans have a kind of a core of what constitutes being a German.
I think this is rapidly changing.
Yeah. Tell me, if you would, what you see as the situation in Germany. Population is stabilizing in growth, aging, necessary to import these workers. Just talk through where Germany stands today. What does it mean for the society going forward?
Germany's population is more or less stable. It needs immigration, and it still has positive immigration numbers. And it has, after some 30 years of a rather passive attitude towards immigration, now adopted an active integration policy.
And the immigrants to Germany are from Turkey?
Yes, Turkey with some 20% where people come from. Now in the past 15 years, immigration from Eastern Europe, from Russia, from Central Asia is stronger, also from Africa and from Latin America. As there are no internal borders in the European Union, there is free movement from all sides. So with a lot of Latin immigration to Spain and Portugal, people are also moving to Germany. It's getting more diverse. It's not only Turkey as the main source of immigration to Germany.
But what will be interesting to see in the European model is that in the U.S. it's not only that immigrants come and there's this tradition of immigration and they become, integrated, Americanized, whatever you want to call it, but also the traditions and the culture that they bring becomes part of the larger American fabric. So a question for me is, at a very crude level, is Burek in Germany as popular as burritos are in the U.S., and not just for the community that originally brought them?
Okay, I'm afraid we have reached 11 o'clock now, but I'm going to give our panelists a final chance for a final reflection or last word, if there's anything else that we're
I would just thank Paul Merage again, and the Merage Foundation for the wonderful job, and thank the fellows for the contributions you have already made, your skills, your ambitions, your commitment to education, and the many, many more contributions you will make in the years ahead. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you very much to our audience and to the panelists. And I'd like to ask the Merage Fellows and board members to please stay on for a meeting in the fourth floor. Did you have? They didn't want to. Thank you. Thank you.